Oh, there. So thank you all for coming. We thought today, since there were people in the community had a bunch of questions, and since I can win valuable prizes if I give the right answers, anyway, we thought that we would take a shot at the questions that people in the community had.
Thank you for agreeing to do that.
Oh, actually, here we have to do it so people can see Brenda also.
That wasn't part
Yeah,
of the
that's good.
program.
Yes, we do it.
Oh, you want?
Whatever you want.
Is that all right?
At your service.
I don't want to embarrass, but you're a great soul. So this is my dear god sister Brenda, who I've known for at least 50 years, which is amazing since neither of us is actually that old. And so Brenda is going to ask questions, and I'm going to try to answer them. These are questions that were presented by different people in the community.
Okay.
Here we go.
And this is a quote from Prabhupada, September 17th, 1972, Los Angeles. I was there. He says, the gopis, so they did not think that Krishna is God. They did not know. Even Mother Yasoda, Nanda Maharaj, all the inhabitants of Vrindavan, they did not know, neither did they care to know whether Krishna is God or not. They simply loved Krishna without any identification. We are worshiping Krishna, God, because we are impressed with so many things that Krishna is the Supreme Lord, he is the absolute truth, and therefore we are a little inclined. All right, let us serve Krishna if he is God. There is some condition. If Krishna is God, so if I do not love, if I do not worship, there may be something wrong. So that is business. But amongst the gopis and the cowherd boys and Vrindavan inhabitants, there was no business. We love Krishna unconditionally. That's all. We do not know anything except Krishna. This is Vrindavan atmosphere. Question. So how do we transition from approaching Krishna consciousness as business with ulterior motive to unconditional love? What are the signs that we're approaching or doing this? Life experience has been that conditional love brings suffering.
Okay, thank you. So I will give a brief summary of that quote. Was from Prabhupada, our teacher, and I'll just briefly explain what the point that he was getting at. That in Vrindavan, where Krishna grew up to the age of 12 or 13, when he came to this world about 5,000 years ago, the people that lived there, his mother, his father, and all the other people in this village, did not think of him as God. They thought of him as Krishna. And so I'll explain what the significance of that is. Also, I want to make one point. It's, of course, true what Prabhupada said, that they didn't know that he was God, but actually, at times they did know. For example, when there was great danger, they turned to Krishna. So why would you turn to a little boy when there's great danger if he's just a little boy? Like generally in communities, if there's some terrible danger, like a fire, or a bad person coming in to threaten people, you don't turn to a little child and say, "Save us." So when it came down to it, they knew that actually had to. But the point is that it's about the nature. It's about the psychology of love. That the extent to which we have material desires, by that I don't just mean like crass greed and lust, but the extent to which we just want things in this world. It could be that I want to be loved, that I want to live comfortably, that I want other people to respect me, etc., etc. So we have different desires. So if we have material desires,
Excuse me.
it's okay. All set?
Yeah.
It's like, for example, just give a simple example. Let's say you're really hungry, like really hungry, and someone comes and says, "Hi, can I talk to you about the botanical gardens in town?" And let's say you're starving. It's like, do you know where there's a restaurant? Do you know where there's like a supermarket? Because you're really have this overwhelming hunger. So it's a general principle of psychology that the stronger a material desire is, whether it's very basic things like hunger, thirst, or sex desire, or just sort of very basic, you could say, animal desires, or it can be more subtle psychological desires like I need to feel that I'm accepted, I want to be loved, or so on and so forth. But in any case, the stronger our desires, the more those desires will shape the way you relate to other people. For example, well, the idea is if someone in some way can satisfy one of your desires, then you may be interested in them. And to the extent that someone has no possibility of satisfying your desires, like I would never marry that guy, or this person's never going to buy my product, just whatever line of work you're in, the extent to which let's say when you have this combination, but your desires are very strong and you meet someone that is not going to satisfy your desires, then you're not going to be very interested. And if you meet someone that could possibly satisfy one of your strong desires, you're going to be interested. And so when you meet someone who can do it all, Krishna, someone who's all powerful, who knows everything, we are know-it-alls. Krishna actually knows everything. And someone who's infinitely beautiful, then the extent to which I still have selfish desires, to that extent, inevitably, that will affect the way I relate to God. And of course, when it reaches a very crass level, you can actually go on Sunday morning television and talk about your experiences. So therefore, I mean, Krishna is God. But let's say you have a soul like these residents of Vrindavan, Krishna's parents, Nanda and Yashoda, the gopis, the cowherd girls, the cowherd boys, who, I mean, the reason they are there, the reason they're in Vrindavan at all, at the same time Krishna's there, is precisely because they're pure souls. If they didn't have pure souls, they wouldn't have made the cut, so to speak, and they'd be somewhere else. But the fact that they're in Vrindavan with Krishna means they're pure souls. And therefore, if you are a pure soul, the fact that Krishna is God, certainly interesting. It's an interesting fact about this person. But if there's nothing you want, if you have no selfish desires, and you're standing in front of someone who's infinitely good looking, like the supreme personality of Rockstar. Mm-hmm. And if you're in front of Krishna, then his beauty it sort of overwhelms any interest you might have in theology. And it's Krishna's beauty that just is overwhelming. It's one thing I find very interesting is that when Krishna was here a little over, actually now it's about 524 years ago. I guess people say for the next 1,000 years. When Krishna was here 5,000 years ago, but technically you have to adjust the numbers. But anyway, when Krishna was here, sometimes he would, because he came, as he says in the Bhagavad Gita, that yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, whenever dharma is declining, and dharma doesn't just mean some rules in a book which kind of require you to act like a good Hindu. Dharma actually is perhaps the most important Sanskrit word for justice. So when we say justice or law, because it's interesting, in let's say in America or any other modern secular country, you can imagine an unjust law. In fact, there often are unjust laws, but you can't imagine unjust dharma because dharma is justice. And so therefore, when the word dharma is used to indicate law, it means a divine law. as stated in the Bhagavatam, dharmam hi sakshat bhagavat pranitam, that ultimately dharma is that which, to give you a very literal translation of the Sanskrit, that which is brought forth by the Lord himself. And so because dharma is a divine law, it's kind of a contradiction in terms of saying unjust justice, whatever that would mean. Of course, that would not stop philosophers from writing hundreds, if not thousands, of articles and books on that, which ultimately will have absolutely no positive effect on the world, although it may help their careers. Anyway, so that I think is the answer to that question. Moving right along.
So there's a request for comment on 4 verses from Srimad Bhagavatam. So the first is Srimad Bhagavatam.
Can I take a look at those?
Yes.
Thank you. There we go. Okay, Bhagavatam 1-4 says the Bhagavatam is the means of conquest. Wish I had the Bhagavatam. Do we have the Bhagavatam?
Yes.
Sure. First canto, please. Third canto, 11th canto. Well, I'm sorry. She's going to come back out on her books. Wow. Great service. I'm definitely going to leave a gratuity. So, I'll read that verse. It's a beautiful verse. Actually, in 1971, when I was married, and I was first president of ISKCON Gainesville, which is next to Alachua. And basically, my wife would actually manage everything. I would just read the Bhagavatam all day, which was, I mean, I actually did other things, but I had a great wife, and so she took care of the temple, and I would memorize Bhagavatam verses. So this verse is Narayanam Namaskritya, Narang Chaiva Narottamam Deving Sarasating Vyasam Tato Jaimadiri, which literally means bowing. I mean, technically in the Sanskrit it says Namaskritya, which means making a bow, literally. So making a vow to Narayan, a name for Krishna in his majestic form as Vishnu, Narang Chaiva, so to Narayana and to Nara, the man. So there is a twin incarnation of Krishna called Nara Narayan. And actually Nara, which literally means like a human being, is Arjuna, Krishna's famous friend Arjuna. And then Krishna comes as himself, as God. And so this twin incarnation, where it's like the Lord and his devotee, is called Nara Narayan. So here these two names are separated. And so making a vow to Narayana, and indeed to Nara, literal translation, and indeed to Nara, who is Narottamam, Narang Narottamam. Uttama is Sanskrit. We have it in English as ultimate. And so Nara Uttama, Narottama means the ultimate human being. So and a bow to the man, the ultimate man, or the ultimate human being. So Deving Saraswati, and to the goddess Saraswati, the goddess of learning. Saraswati, actually Saras in Sanskrit means a current, like of a river. And Vati is just the feminine of Vat, like Bhagavat, which means one who possesses. And so Saraswati means this sacred river that possesses many beautiful currents. And so that's actually what Saraswati means. So Deving Saraswati Vyasam, and to the literary incarnation Vyasam. So having made a vow to all these, Tato Jayam Udirayet, which literally means then let victory be pronounced. And so Prabhupada translates that Jayam, the word for word, all that is meant for conquering in the translation, the means of conquest. But actually in the Sanskrit, you have the simple word Jaya, which comes from the root Ji, which means to conquer or win. And so Jaya just means victory. Let victory be pronounced, be uttered, be declared. Udirayet. And so the question is, what does this mean? So, well, first of all, if you talk about victory, Jaya, then the real question is, what are you trying to win? Like, or do you just get what nowadays, what do they give? Participation trophy. So if you say victory, what are you trying to win? And so what we're trying to win we're trying to win back our real life. We're trying to win back real happiness, real knowledge, real love, real relationships, as opposed to brand X, which they used to say, people a little older, whenever they do commercials when we were kids, they always show the product you're supposed to buy and then brand X, which is another product which you never want to buy because it's terrible. So anyway, those who are a little older, they're laughing. Those who are not laughing are unfortunately too young. So that's what we're trying to win back. That's what we're trying to win back. And it's interesting because if you think of these sort of military metaphors, these military images, Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra with Arjuna was not merely an image, it's a real historical event. But here you have Krishna speaking Bhagavad Gita, which really is everyone's ticket back to the spiritual world. And so he chose to speak it on a battlefield. He could have spoken it anywhere, in a restaurant, in a palace, in a field with cows grazing, in a national park or something. I mean, Krishna could have spoken the Bhagavad Gita anywhere, but he chose to speak it on a battlefield. And there's a dramatic verse in the first chapter that says, Senayor ubhayor madhye ratang stapya me achyuta, where Arjuna says to Krishna, Achyuta, O infallible one, stapya, place my chariot between these two armies. And all of us, now this is a very pregnant analogy. It's powerful because, first of all, ratang stapya, and the word stop, the verb stand, which you get stapya, we still have in English as the word stand. It hasn't changed much from the Sanskrit. So there's a very ancient Vedic analogy or metaphor in which, analogy, I guess, would mean A is like B. Metaphor would be like A is B. But anyway, I'm going to go into literary terms. So the body, our body, is compared in very ancient literature and in the Bhagavad Gita to a vehicle, to a car, in the sense that just as a driver drives the car, we are the soul driving this body. So Arjuna says, place my vehicle. And so if you are living 5,000 years ago and you hear Arjuna say this, you would have in your mind this metaphor that the rata, and not only that, it's such a powerful, it's a powerful, powerful metaphor. We're not taking it to the absurd extreme where this is not a real historical event. No, it's a historical event, but the most powerful historical events are powerful precisely because they present to us universal metaphors. So it's not just reading some boring history that happened thousands of years ago, but oh my God, this happened thousands of years ago, but it speaks to me so powerfully today because in a deepest sense, nothing has changed. And so just as in your body, you are there in the heart and you've got company, Krishna. Krishna is also there in the heart. And so the body is compared to Rata, the vehicle, and in the heart of this chariot, the same two people are there, the soul and God. So again, it's real history, but the metaphor is very powerful, and it would have been very powerful to people that heard it 5,000 years ago. And it's very powerful for us today. Another very powerful image, just in the simple Sanskrit phrase, Ratang Stapya, Ubhayor Senayor. Ubhaya, Uba means both in Sanskrit. So Ubhayor Senayor, of both armies. Sanskrit has singular and plural, but also a dual form. So you can be more precise. So this is the dual form in Sanskrit. So you don't have to use the number two. If you just say, you say Senayor, it means of the two armies. Ubhayor, of both. Ubhayor, Senayor. Madhye, which we still have in English, middle, Madhya. You can see that Sanskrit is actually very closely related to English. So in the middle, Madhye, in the middle of these two armies, place my chariot, Achyuta, infallible one. So we are all standing between two armies because all of us have within us virtue, purity, a desire to do the right thing. And all of us have our little, our little devil inside. Sorry, I don't mean literally there's a devil. But all of us have our higher nature and our lower nature. And when you take up bhakti yoga, you're kind of declaring war on the icky part of you, to use a sort of a colloquial word. Because I mean, there's a part of us that wants to honor our body and not defile it by sort of hedonistic acts in which no real love is involved, no real higher purpose. So there's a part of all of us that wants to honor our body as a gift of God. There's a part in all of us that wants to treat other people with love. And there's another part, of course, that wants to treat them the way they deserve to be treated, at least from the human point of view. But so some people really can only be loved at a distance, but still we can love them. So, I mean, real world stuff. But still, we all have our higher nature and we all have our lower nature. But the higher nature is really us. The lower nature is just sort of a delusion or a false identity. It's like someone goes to a party and gets drunk and then wakes up the next morning with another person. Oh my God, like, what am I doing with this person? So, or someone has a fit of rage and then next thing the person knows the person's on trial for murder. And so these are, of course, dramatic examples, but I won't belabor this, but all of us have a higher and lower nature, a selfish side and a selfless side, a loving side and an envious side or a hateful side, a side that wants to honor the body and a side that wants to just totally exploit the body without thinking about where it's going to lead. And so those that we're between these two armies, and they're two armies because our higher self and lower self are both pulling on us. And in fact, the word higher self is literally from the Gita, because Atma means the self in Sanskrit. It can also be translated as soul. It means self. It really means self, in fact, and it's also used as a reflexive pronoun. Like, for example, you could actually say in Sanskrit, Atma Seva Rata Shocham, which would actually mean literally a self-service car wash in Sanskrit. I mean, it's a little goofy, but I'm just giving that example. So you can actually, because Atma, like if you say Atma Dehe, which means in my own body. So it could mean, or like Swadehi. So therefore, sometimes to make clear, like in the Gita or other Sanskrit literatures, that we're not using the word Atma just as a reflexive pronoun, but we're actually using the word Atma to mean the self in a serious philosophical sense. They'll say Adhyatma, which you'll find in the Gita, which means higher self, the higher self. So anyway, moving right along. So that's the Gita. So then victory means that your higher self wins out, that the best part of you, the purest part of you, the eternal part of you, because if we're doing business as just some guy or some girl, I mean, obviously, if you're filling out a form, say, to get a credit card and they say date of birth and you write in a verse in the Gita, the soul is never born. Nice, but you're not going to get the credit card. So, and that's actually recognized in Vedic culture, and they have these two words, vyavasatmika and paramarthika. Vyavasatmika just means like routine business. You have to get along in this world. Sometimes you got to say, I was born here, and this is my family, and this is my job, because that's just the world. You have to say that sometimes. So that's called vyavaharika, from the word vyavahara, which just means like ordinary dealings. And then you have paramartha, which literally means the highest meaning, the ultimate meaning of things, or the ultimate purpose. And from that, the word paramarthika, which means, so you can use the word atma in both these senses. It can just mean a reflexive pronoun, or it can mean talking about the eternal soul. So in the sense of the eternal soul, we are between two armies that are both trying to pull us to their side. And self-realization means you do the right thing in satsanga, in the company of other good souls. I thought I'd just mention one little thing, and that is when I was studying at Harvard, I would, of course, sometimes go to the Boston Temple, which is just on the other side of the Charles River. And so when I was driving back, they had this really nice sign. They used to put like wisdom on public buildings. They would never do that now because they'd get sued immediately. But on this bridge going across the Charles River, it said the community of the wise is the welfare of the world. Probably still there. I thought that was, of course, satsanga. The community of the wise is the welfare of the world. So here we are. Actually, this is funny. Even on the Harvard floor, they have this building in the Harvard Yard called Emerson Hall, which is the philosophy building. And they have like the crown of the building. So they used to put like wisdom, even non-secular wisdom, which today, of course, is shocking. But and so on the Harvard philosophy building, there's actually a Bible quote, which I'm sure, is very embarrassing to the current philosophers they have there. But it says, what is man that thou art mindful of him? Which means like, who are we? We're so insignificant that God would actually even think about us. One more I have to give you from Harvard. From the 19th century, there was some German noble that gave this big donation to Harvard to build a building for Germanic studies. And on that building, which is kind of built like a little fairy tale palace, but on that building, it says, es ist der Geist, der sich den Körper baut. Can you speak German? It is the soul that builds for itself a body. So anyway, but of course they don't put things like that in their buildings anymore. Because they would probably, they'd be sued for probably inflicting emotional distress on some agnostic. So now the next verse, which I don't have here, is 3:25:20. It says, the value of sadhusanga, constantly seeing good and bad as itself a bad quality. I would say the key word there is constantly. I mean, obviously, if someone gives you some food and it's very unhealthy, it's bad food. And you're not going to say, I don't see good and bad, so I'm going to, poison myself with this food. So I think the word here is constantly, in the sense that in higher consciousness, you have this wonderful vision that Krishna is everywhere. And Krishna talks about that. Krishna says in the Gita that the best yogi is the one actually who sees me everywhere, atmopam yena, by universal empathy, and sees that God is in everything. Atmopam yena sarvatra, which literally means universal empathy. And so, we do have to make practical distinctions. You have to make distinctions of what is good and what is harmful to you, what is beneficial. But at the same time, beyond that, there is an overarching awareness that Krishna is in everything, and everything that exists is actually his energy. So this verse is not meant to completely obliterate your common sense, but it's just meant to teach that there is a higher vision. Okay, this is from 1937, I guess, which I translated. So don't sue me if you don't like it. Real heroism is to conquer the tendency to enjoy material life. Because, okay, then, what does it mean to be a hero? It means you step forward and you do the right thing, and you do it to benefit the world, and you have the courage to do so. Because there's different types of fear. One type of fear is if I go to defend this innocent person, I may get hurt. And so I don't want to get hurt. So I think we're just going to have to sacrifice this poor innocent person. But there's another kind of fear. So if you, in general terms, talk about heroism, as sort of putting aside some fear you may have of losing something yourself in order to do what's needed and what's important. So we do have a fear that if we give up sense gratification, we're just going to lose things that we really want and maybe even really need. And if our realization of Krishna is not strong, then we may accept philosophically that I'll be happier with Krishna, but as far as I can tell right now, from my present vantage point, I'm going to be miserable if I give up this material enjoyment. And so, and I mean, there's something to that, because what Krishna actually says in the Bhagavad Gita is that we have human needs. Krishna recognizes that. He gives some basic examples like eating and sleeping, and talks about other things. And he says you have to be moderate. If you eat too much or too little, if you sleep too much or too little. So one requirement to practice spiritual life is that you be balanced in terms of your basic human needs. And so, on the other hand, heroism to conquer. So that doesn't mean you're going to do it tonight. Despite this lecture, you may actually walk out the door not absolutely 100% self-realized, which I'll take as a, of course, as a personal offense, but
we get our money back if we don't.
No refunds. I mean, should have been on the invitation. So, but these are goals. In other words, I remember when I was about 14 or something, I was in 9th grade, and for an English at Palms Junior High School, honk if you know Palms. It's actually near the LA Temple. You know Palms Junior High School. Yeah, so in the 9th grade, it's so funny. The self-esteem movement actually kind of did away with calling anything junior. You can't, because if you say junior high, it may affect the self-esteem of people in junior high school. I swear to God, I'm not making this stuff up. And also, we don't have junior colleges anymore. We have community colleges. But it just is a tribute to the virtue of the people that manage this country. So, but at least we should know the goal. So when I was in the 9th grade, 13 or 14, and so I took a public speech class, like public speaking, which satisfied an English requirement. And so one of our projects was we were all given these pithy little proverbs, and we had to give a talk about them. So mine was, I still remember this. It was hitch your wagon to a star. Obviously a frontier saying, hitch your wagon to a star, in the sense of, because you hitch your wagon, the thing that pulls it. And by the way, that hitching, connecting your wagon with whatever is going to pull it, that joining together is called yoking things, which is actually comes from the Sanskrit yoga, which means the same thing, connecting things. So in other words, if you're going to connect or hitch your wagon to something that's going to pull the wagon, if you hitch it to a star, aim high. Have great goals, have inspiring vision of where you could go, and let that be your guide. And so that's what this verse is talking about. Have, dare to dream and imagine yourself, literally form an image. Imagine yourself as a pure soul, as a great soul, as someone that loves Krishna, knowing that that's who you really are anyway. And so it's like sort of sadhana psychology, in the sense that you're practicing seeing yourself as who you really are. And so that this is about. It doesn't mean like you can do it in an artificially short time. So we'll now return this to my. What's that?
So
Yes,
do
please.
you need to see yourself by yourself, higher by yourself, like manifest the best, or just
Well, actually, the nice
individual?
thing, the nice thing about self-realization, it's like it's all or nothing, in the sense that if you see yourself as a soul and you're really seeing it, or you're really even at some level understanding that, you must be seeing everyone else as a soul. It's like when the sun rises, it's not that the sun illumines this house, but not the house next to it, assuming there's not a big tree over the other house. In philosophy classes, you learn to, take care of all those possible objections. So imagine there's two houses, and neither of them is under the shade of a big tree, and neither of them, each of them has direct access to sunshine, and one house is illuminated, the other isn't. That's not possible. The nature of sunlight is it illumines everything simultaneously and equal. Simultaneous and equal. So when you see yourself as a soul, at whatever level, it can be an actual vision, it can just be that you're starting to understand it more, you will see everyone else in the same way. Whoops. This thing. Oh,
Es que al tocarlo se-
Okay.
Yeah, it's on. Yeah, it should be good. It was on.
It wasn't on.
It's
I think it was on.
charging. Thank you.
So that's the idea. You'll see everyone like that. So no, it's not just private.
So that means that we focus in self-realization, learning, and that will be contagious to others. But we need to accept that we will be living by ourselves because other people cannot be in the same level.
Well, it's lonely at the top, as they say.
Lonely.
So if you are actually self-realized, then you're not going to have a lot of colleagues. However, a devotee who is actually advanced in Krishna consciousness is a friend to all, and people will like that person. So if someone is a devotee and doesn't have a lot of friends, that's definitely something wrong there. Because when you're really Krishna conscious, you become, if not greatly extroverted, but at some level gregarious. You really love other people if you love yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, how can you be self-realized? The way, by the way, to be humble and still have strong self-esteem, there's actually a way to do that. There's a workaround for this one. And that is, the way to have real self-esteem, and a certain amount of that is necessary to function in this world, the way to do that is see yourself through Krishna's eyes. Krishna loves us, which itself is kind of amazing. But Krishna loves us because it's like, let's say you have a child and your child is, doing something really heartwarming, like vomiting or just acting out or whatever. So at that point, the parents who love the child, they don't love the child less. It's a good thing I didn't have kids because I had too much bad karma for the way I treated my parents. I wasn't evil. I didn't do like horrible things, but I was just an incredible pain in the neck for them. But anyway, so parents love their children, even if the children act out. And so in that way, you have to see yourself that way. When you see yourself through Krishna's eyes, you can understand, okay, I'm a conditioned soul now. And I still have some inappropriate desires and sometimes I even may do something inappropriate. However, I'm a work in progress. I'm actually a pure soul. And if I look at myself through Krishna's eyes, because Krishna loves me, I will learn to love myself without ego, for the simple reason that my self-love is always through Krishna's eyes. And as Prabhupada said, and as the scriptures say, where there's light, there can't be darkness. So when you're remembering Krishna and trying to see through Krishna's eyes, you can't be in darkness. And so it's a safe way to love yourself and respect yourself and all that. Because Krishna is involved, you're not going to fall into just mundane narcissism like 99% of the present human population. You're not going to fall into the, I'm perfect the way I am. Really? That's too bad. That's as high as you go. So it's funny because I'm a big Jane Austen fan because I write novels, and she's the best. She was also actually very religious, so I'm a big Jane Austen fan. So a common way people would talk back then is that I want to improve myself. It's like respectful people talk that way, which means that whether it's learning a musical instrument, whether it was developing better character. So the whole spirit of the times was to improve yourself, not to say you're perfect the way you are. Anyway, so that's it. Seeing yourself through Krishna's eyes. So next question. We need to have someone stands up and points to all the prizes I winning.
Behind door number 3.
Vedic Jeopardy. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
How does a person with a background of childhood trauma from sexual abuse approach the notion of God as having a sex life? It could be quite a stretch for that person to be able to feel comfortable when they've had such trauma, even if managed and healed, but still remnants remain.
Yes.
And if this person is a devotee and understands and honors that same very trauma and neglect as being a gift from Krishna that propelled them on the spiritual path to seek Krishna, being the impetus to seek something higher and more meaningful, will this person ever be able to approach the highest states of prema with this kind of trauma still at times activated?
That's a very serious question. Actually, I once had an experience I don't think I've ever shared with anyone my whole life. And it's kind of, I guess I'm going to cite this now, which I've never told anyone. Don't worry, it's not. But just because it's kind of, I guess, me trying to get empathetically into the spirit of this question. When I was at Berkeley, I must have been about 19 years old or something. And I met this girl who I never really got to know her very well, but I got to know her. And I was kind of interested in this girl. And literally, we'd only known each other for an hour. Bless you. But I was kind of, and I was 19 years old, and naturally I had very powerful industrial strength endorphins. And so when I was with this girl, she just, she at one point she said to me that she just kind of confessed, sort of, I guess, to explain why she was not really comfortable with any kind of intimacy, that she had been abused by her father. And what I remember about that is that, because in those days we didn't know about those things. No one ever talked about it. No one ever, I don't think I ever heard anyone in my life talk about that. I knew what it was, but we never talked about it then. And I remember my response was, I was just completely confused. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. Because, you respond within a culture. You respond within a world that you've grown up in which you've learned certain things. They say that, you say this. And so, we're not as independent as we may think we are. And as, we actually, we really are to a great extent, we respond and act within what we've learned a culture. And of course, we have variations on it. So I was just completely bewildered. I felt sorry for her, but I didn't know what to say. I was afraid, if I say something, does it make it better? Does it make it worse? I was completely confused about it. And shocked, of course, because I'd never really heard about that stuff among people I knew. And so, so now I thought that I had that experience when I was about 19 years old. And now here I am, and, speaking on a similar topic. And so now I'm supposed to have a little more to say about it, say something which is hopefully helpful. So, that is a challenge. It is a real challenge. It's not easy. I haven't experienced things like that, but I have studied it a bit, because in my job of, having to counsel, God knows how many people, hundreds, not thousands of people, having to counsel people in many different countries and different cultures. And so I've heard things like that. I've had to deal with that as a counselor. So, so I'd like to start with a general point and then move to the specific. The general point is that we all have different obstacles. Everyone has obstacles. Everyone has to overcome something. And so it's possible to say that the solution is Krishna consciousness without, let's say, without just not taking the problem seriously and just giving like the stock answer. Like, anything anyone tells me, I'm just going to say, chant Hare Krishna. And it even became like a cliche in the Hare Krishna movement. Like, someone had a problem, they'd say, don't just tell me to chant Hare Krishna. So I understand that. And it's not just chant Hare Krishna, but there's a sense in which, obviously, if someone has been subjected to that kind of trauma, there's a lot of science, there's a lot of social science, there are a lot of treatments. And so would probably recommend, just whatever benefit you can derive from professional help, you should derive it. But at the same time, I think we can say more than just, let's say, a mental health professional. And that is because we know that the mind, which is traumatized, not the soul is actually never traumatized. The mind is traumatized, but the mind is obviously very intimate, fundamental part, you could say, of our false ego. But nonetheless, we are presently doing business as material bodies, an American or from some other place, or a man or a woman, or young or old. I mean, we're kind of doing business as that bodily identity. And so the extent to which, again, apart from all the professional help, the extent to which someone can actually achieve self-realization, the degree to which they can do that, to that degree, they will understand that this sort of injured mind or this traumatized mind is actually not me. And I have a complete identity. I have a complete identity which is in no way traumatized. And so it's almost like, I'll give an example of one of the great Vedic stories, Cinderella. I saw this interview because I write, so I saw this interview with Steven Spielberg. And the person asked him, do you like those stories like Cinderella and Snow White? His answer was very interesting. He said, of course, everything comes from those stories. And I have to admit, even as a Hare Krishna guru, I still get a little teary when I see a really good version of Cinderella. Because there are really universal stories there. And so if you think about it, Cinderella was the sort of mistreated, cruelly treated stepchild. But because she was so virtuous and she was so powerfully virtuous, she ultimately went from being a mistreated stepchild to a queen. And it's a great story. Anyway, so I'm not going to go into the whole Cinderella thing here, but so in that sense, if someone has been treated abusively, mistreated, treated cruelly or unfairly, unjustly, like Cinderella, I think that each one of us can find a glorious, beautiful life if we stick to our virtue. And our virtue is Krishna consciousness. Probably, in 1972, when I was 23, I took sannyas, formal renounced order of life. And I think it's remarkable that I became a big leader in ISKCON sannyasi at least 6 or 7 years before my brain was fully formed, because of the male brain, which will, produce some unexpected consequences. Anyway, but I somehow stayed in the saddle. But yeah, we have to somehow or other. It's like it gets back to that thing of so I took sannyas, and I was inspired, and it wasn't always easy, but I was inspired. So I would say, even if someone obviously cannot immediately get over their trauma or whatever's holding them back, but the more we're inspired, even if it's still troubling you in some ways. For example, when I was about 9 years old, my teacher discovered in school that I had to get glasses. Of course, I was deeply afraid everyone's going to call me Four Eyes. And so I wouldn't put them on in school for several days until my mother actually laid down the law. So, but anyway, and then I joined the Hare Krishna movement. Now I'm practicing self-realization, and I still need glasses in certain situations. So, traumas, in some ways we can be emotionally injured. And it never like absolutely leave the material mind. But you can be so inspired in your spiritual life. You can be so inspired in your spiritual life that you become the witness of an injured subtle body. You can become the witness of your own mind. And and you can have a great life. So, I mean, it's really true that if we can somehow become Krishna conscious, each in their own way, if we can somehow advance in Krishna consciousness, we will rise above these things. Krishna says in the Gita, Indriyebhyas parang manaha, manasastu parabud here, that Indriyani parani ahur, he says that the senses they're superior, literally, Indriyani. Anyway, it's neuter plural in Sanskrit, Indriya. So Indriyani parani, they're above or higher, because, and it's interesting because this word parani, the neuter plural adjective, in the chapter 7 of the Gita, Krishna talks about bhumi apana vayu, earth, water, fire, the material elements, and then he says that apare how does he put it? Oh my God. Bhumi apana vayu kangmanu vidhirvicha. Then he says that there's a higher energy of mind, that there's a para prakriti, which is the soul, which is a living being. The reason I mention this is I think you could make a very clear argument in the Gita in terms of philological argument, that when Krishna uses the word para, higher or superior, in many cases, he actually means consciousness as opposed to dead matter. And that's actually how he uses the word apara, not higher or lower, and para. He uses it in the 7th chapter to mean there's an apara, lower energy, and a higher energy, higher because it's consciousness. And so in the same way, if you understand that, Krishna uses the word para actually in an earlier chapter where he says that indriyani parani, the senses are higher, meaning that the senses channel cognition. Because the senses are actually an instrument of cognition, and therefore cognition is always higher than dead matter. And so, are we still allowed to say dead matter? Okay. So indriyani parani ahur, and then indriye byak parang manaha, using the same adjective, and then above the senses is the mind, because the mind is kind of like the organizing facility for the senses. Because if you think about it, at any moment, all of your senses, all of your 5, what are called gyanendriyas, your knowledge acquiring senses, they're bringing in data. I mean, almost anywhere you go in the world, there's some visible object, there's some audible object, there's some something you can smell. I'm not going to say smellable. That's like a very unfortunate word. But so all of your 5 senses are functioning at once, and all this information. So why isn't there chaos in your mind? Because your mind is filtering some things, foregrounding some sensations, backgrounding others, amplifying some, and tuning out others. And so the reason that you have sane cognition is because the mind is doing all that. But the mind not only organizes sensations, it also responds emotionally to them. And so the mind, it really performs those 2 functions. It organizes sense data and responds emotionally to them. So when you say things like, I just feel like doing that, which is, a really logical reason to do something. But anyway, so then Krishna says, manasas tu para buddhir. Above the mind is buddhi, which actually means rational intelligence. If you look at chapter 18 in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna talks about jnana in the 3 modes of nature and buddhi in the 3 modes of nature, meaning knowledge and intelligence, it's clear from the examples Krishna gives that the word jnana in this can mean worldview. It's like when you put it all together, what's your worldview? That's jnana. And then when you kind of break things down analytically, that's buddhi. So buddhi is sort of analytic, rational intelligence, like what to do, what not to do, when to go in, when to leave, and so on. So that analytic intelligence is buddhi. And Krishna says that rational intelligence is above your emotional center. It doesn't mean we should have no emotions, It just means we should allow ourselves to indulge in emotions that we can rationally justify. Like if you're falling in love with someone who's going to basically destroy your life and that of everyone you love, then your intelligence should show you, like, get out of there. There's this very interesting statement in the Gita in chapter 6 where Krishna uses this expression, which I think is just really inspiring and enlightening. He says that when you reach this Krishna consciousness, you realize there's no higher pleasure. This is the highest pleasure. And he says this supreme pleasure is buddhi graham, which literally means acceptable to your intelligence. So it's not that you don't feel, but check in with your brain before you let your heart go wild. Because probably most of the misery in this world is because people thought, no, it's all about my heart chakra, and turned off their brain and did something really stupid in the name of the heart chakra. So Krishna uses this expression. Again, you should have feelings, you should have powerful feelings, but they have to kind of be checked out by your intelligence. So in that sense, Krishna says the intelligence is above the mind. And then he says, buddhi and then beyond the intelligence is the soul. Krishna even describes bhakti yoga in very important verses in the Gita as buddhi yoga. Like in the 10:10 in the Gita, where Krishna says, Te Sham, for them. Te Shang Satata Yuktanam. We're always engaged. Yukta is the same as the word yoga. Yoga means link. Yukta means link it. So if you are yukta, it means you've actually established your yoga connection in bhakti yoga. And Krishna uses the word yukta dozens of times in the Gita to mean you're in a state of yoga. You're actually connected to God. So anyway, so Krishna says, Satatang Teshang, for them who are satata, always yuktanam, linked to me, bhajatam, and worshiping me, priti purvakam, with real love. Priti purvakam. I mean, I can go on all day explaining all the amazing details of the Sanskrit. Last one, I promise you, then I'm going to control myself. Purvaka, purva means we still have in English, it became the word previous, same PRV. And so priti purvakam, it also means first, like before first. So priti is love. Priti purvakam, which is what Krishna says, means put love first. That's literally what it means, putting love first. So Krishna says, those who are worshiping me, putting love first. He says, dadami buddhi yogam tam. I give them something by which they come to me. Jainamam upajantite, by which they come to me. And when he says that he gives a loving devotee by which the devotee comes to him is rational intelligence. Not just rational intelligence, but the yoga of rational intelligence, where you are engaged in this loving service to Krishna using your intelligence. What to do, what not to do, what's good for me, what's not good for me. And so Krishna consciousness is not just a sentimental thing, which Prabhupada kept trying to emphasize. It's engaging your heart and very much your intelligence. So anyway, we should probably go on to the next one.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you all for listening.
The first of the 10 commandments is, thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Yes.
Exodus 23. Then we have the part about not worshiping any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is in the earth beneath,
Yes.
etc. Before we get, I, the Lord my God, am a jealous God. Exodus 25. Yet renunciation is one of Lord Krishna's 6 opulences, being arguably the exact opposite of jealousy. What's going on with this?
Okay.
Wait, we're not done. Can you, unless we are.
Someone's double dipping. Yes.
Do you want me to finish?
Well, let me answer that first, then we'll go to the next one.
All right.
Because there's a lot of, first of all, and I've actually studied Judeo-Christianity at an academic level. Don't hold that against me, but the first commandment is taken by scholars to obviously indicate that in the Old Testament vision, at least, because the Old Testament really has many different layers, because it was kind of like the running historical chronicle of the Jewish people. And so that commandment that you shall have no other gods before me obviously means that there are other gods. That's the first thing. And so this idea that now the person that kind of got it all wrong and sort of introduced into certainly Christianity, and maybe, back influence, some extent Judaism, was Paul of Tarsus. Do not get me started on Paul of Tarsus. But anyway, because Paul, for example, this is in the New Testament. He received a letter. We know that because, almost half the New Testament are letters of Paul. And it's obvious in the letters that he's responding to questions people were asking him. And so he got one question where there was a dispute in one of the early Jesus communities. It wasn't called Christianity then. It was a branch of Judaism, actually, the first several generations. So, and they had all these disputes. They were doing what neophyte practitioners do best, fighting with each other. The early Hare Krishna movement. So anyway, someone wrote him a letter saying there's a dispute in our community because they were carnivorous, and Paul was kind of like taught, the people should be omnivores for different reasons. But anyway, so there was a dispute going on because some people said we want to eat meat, and so we can. And Paul, because Paul was trying to take people away from diaspora synagogues by telling them that you can be a Jew and you don't have to follow all the rules. So he was like saying, okay, you don't need to follow the dietary rules, which were, a significant part of Judaism. And so they were quoting Paul. Yeah, we can eat meat because Paul said we can eat all this stuff. But then other people were arguing in that early Jesus community, again, not yet called Christianity. Other people were arguing that but the only meat for sale in the market is meat that is sold by pagans, and they've offered it to their little gods. And so therefore we should not eat meat which has been offered to these false gods, because we worship the living God, not the dead gods. So Paul's answer shows how much he differs from the Old Testament, which he thought he was strictly accurately interpreting, which he claimed to be accurately interpreting. And that is because the Old Testament clearly talks about other gods. And not only in the first commandment, in many other places, it talks about them as real people. But you have to worship Yahweh because he's your guy. He's your God. He brought you out of bondage in Egypt and so on. And then as Judaism developed, it became you have to worship Yahweh because he's the supreme God. It wasn't merely their tribal deity, but actually he's the supreme God. So anyway, but if you look at the Old Testament, which the early Christians always claimed to be strictly following, because there wasn't any other Bible, there was no New Testament. That came much later. So there, and they were still a part of Judaism. So early Christianity, if you look at the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're constantly doing what is called proof texting, which means they're citing something from the Old Testament, like Jesus, for example. Jesus did this because it was said that a great soul would do that. Or Jesus said this because it was said that a great soul. So whenever the New Testament says because it was said that, they're talking about the Old Testament. So they're constantly proof texting. And, there's a lot of that proof texting, by the way, in probably the greatest piece of sacred music ever written in the West, which is Handel's Messiah oratorio. And so a lot of that, for unto us a son is born. I mean, I can go on and on about this. So anyway, so proof texting was, in a sense, the most important way in which early followers of Jesus were trying to prove or convince other people that he's bona fide. And yet Paul deviates. And Paul says the answer he wrote back was, you don't have to. He said, actually, there's no problem eating the meat because those gods don't exist. Whoops. because those gods don't exist. However, in order not to agitate other people in the ashram or other people in the community, because the meat is offered to gods that don't exist, so maybe you shouldn't buy it. But that's just one example, and there are many. Anyway, we won't obsess on Paul here. So another thing about the Ten Commandments. When I was in Israel, we have a lot of devotees in Israel. I mean, it's a great place to teach Krishna consciousness. It's amazing. It has one of the highest rates of anywhere in the world of vegans. And so so I went over the Ten Commandments with native Hebrew speakers, and it's the same Hebrew. I mean, they actually speak Hebrew. That's their first language. And we went over the Ten Commandments in Hebrew because I was into this graven image thing. And of course, graven, although also, of course, comes from Sanskrit. Graven means a stone. Graven means sort of like carved in stone. Anyway, so I kept going over and over because I said, I want to get this right. I don't want to get this wrong. And so I had them translated repeatedly for me. What does the Hebrew actually say? And if you read the Hebrew of the Ten Commandments, what it's actually saying is you should not worship many gods or make graven images of them. And what the Ten Commandments do not say is that under no circumstances can you have some kind of visible image of God, which I thought was interesting. In fact, in the Old Testament, there are cases where there are visible images of God. One is it's like, Shalagram Shila. We have, Shalagram Shila. By the way, Shala is a hardwood tree in India, the Shala tree, and Grama means village. And so, Shila, not Sheila. Sheila is in Australia means a girl, a Sheila. But anyway, Sheila in Sanskrit means a stone, Sheila. So Shalagram Sheila kind of would be like saying in English an oak village stone. So, the Shalagram Sheila, it's a stone which is worshipped as Krishna. It's not anatomically human, but it's Krishna, happy face and everything. Or even Lord Jagannath is not exactly anatomically human. So, but the reason I mention that, because it is Krishna, and it is definitely Krishna. But the reason I mention that is because one of the most famous stories in the Bible, Old Testament, is when the Jews had been enslaved. That great story of Joseph, which, by the way, is the favorite story of the Quran. The Quran is sort of building on Judeo-Christianity, and by far the most oft-repeated, the favorite story in the Quran, the story of Joseph, the coat of many colors and all that. Anyway, so what was I going to say? That so the Bible, the Old Testament says that how Joseph actually saved Egypt by interpreting the Pharaoh's dream, and then generations passed, and no one in Egypt remembered that a Jew had saved Egypt. And so the Jews were enslaved. And Moses, of course, found out that he was actually an adopted child, that he was actually Jewish, but he'd been adopted by the Pharaoh. And then he killed a taskmaster, someone that was like whipping the slaves and making them build these. I mean, the Egyptians were all about megalithic structures, pyramids and everything. And so Moses killed this taskmaster who was abusing these Hebrew slaves, and therefore he had to flee for his life. And so he fled Egypt and kind of got married and was just sort of a nice grihasta. And then he thought, this is my life. Like, I'm not going back to Egypt because my life isn't worth anything back there. And that's my life. So then one day he's walking somewhere and he sees this thing which is impossible. He sees a bush which is on fire, but it's not being consumed. This burning bush. And he's thinking, what is that? And so then he approaches it, and it's a really great story. And then this voice speaks to him and tells him, take off your sandals, for you on holy ground. And so taking your shoes off and you go into the temple is a very old custom. And so then, Moses says, who are you? And, I am that I am. And so it's God speaking to him. So, and God tells him to go back to Egypt. And he says, I mean, with all due respect, that's not going to happen. And then finally, God got twist his arm and ends up going back to Egypt. And you have the whole story. And finally the angel of death and all that. I mean, it's a very powerful story, which actually sustained a whole civilization for thousands of years. Very powerful story.
From the Quran or in the Quran?
No, that's from the Old Testament.
No.
That's the book of Exodus. The Quran talks about it, but the original story is in the book of Exodus, means like, leaving Egypt. So then Jesus, because of, did some things wrong, so he's not going to actually enter the Holy Land. And then, but when he sort of comes to the border of the Promised Land, God gives him a special blessing where God says, because he wants to see God, which is very interesting. Moses says that he wants to see God, which means that God has a visible form, just not visible to him. And God's reply to him is that I will let you see me, but because you're not completely self-realized, you won't see me fully. So God goes past him in a human-like form, and he just sees the back of God as God goes by him. It's very interesting also because if you look at Judaism today, what we really have is rabbinical Judaism. If you look at Judaism, I don't know how I'm getting this, but anyway, I'll explain it. If you look at Judaism in Israel before the destruction of the temple, when that's when the Israelis had this incredibly brilliant idea, being a tiny little country, to attack the Roman Empire. Someone was really thinking. So when that happened, when they were driven out of Israel and the temple was destroyed and all that, they had to circle the wagons because they were actually fighting just to survive as a religion. And so therefore they kind of, before that, if you look at Israel, and this is totally mainstream scholarship you'll hear in any class, in any good university. Judaism is very diverse. There were all kinds of mysticisms. There was all kinds of meditations on a body of God. And then they just kind of circled the wagons and, okay, rabbinic Judaism, Talmud interpretation. In the Middle Ages, actually, maybe 1,000 years ago, there was actually a powerful mystic Jewish community that meditated on the body of God, the spiritual body of God. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is these are not like crazy ideas that come from the fuzzy East. And there's one last thing, then we'll get to the next question. There's a famous Baroque composer. I'm like a big fan of Baroque. I play Baroque music, Bach, Handel, and other people. And so one great Baroque composer whom Handel and Bach both studied was Buxtehude, who was Scandinavian. And he put to music this powerful Christian poem, which is a meditation on the spiritual body of Jesus. So the idea of a spiritual body is a perennial idea, by the way, in world religions. And there's even meditations on the spiritual body of the Buddha. So people are drawn again and again back to this meditation. And so, of course, you hit the jackpot when you discover Vaishnavism. So, next.
The double dip.
Okay, yeah. So that's some stuff about the 10 Commandments.
Can you give any historical or linguistic insight into this rather intimidating Torah/Old Testament pronouncement, and perhaps give us some pointers for navigating this rough terrain when trying to share Krishna consciousness with Westerners?
There's a great song in Handel's. I mean, it's a great piece of music. And so one of the verses they quote from the Bible that Handel put to this incredible music is that the Lord is coming and he makes the rough places smooth.
Mm-hmm.
And so the point is that when you're Krishna conscious, life's kind of a bowl of cherries. I mean, the sense that we may have problems with our material mind or body, but theology is not a problem. And so some people don't have because this whole thing of this, for example, it doesn't say in the Old Testament that you shouldn't say the name of God. The Jews think, well, it's very dangerous to offend the name of God. And the easiest way not to offend is never say it. So now it's like, you don't say it. And it's just like, come on, guys, we can do better than that. So in Krishna consciousness, because the holy name, Shem Kavod in Hebrew, which means the holy name. Baruch Shem Kavod, blessed is the holy name. So it's a big deal. It's funny because some people, later people said, don't say it. But if you look at all these ancient prayers, they always glorify the name of God. So I think that Krishna consciousness to the rescue. Lord Chaitanya is Krishna himself. You know, I mean, the special guest star of the Hare Krishna movement is God. And so, I think our job is to try to introduce this knowledge. Yes.
All right. In reaching out to Westerners, your point of creating more relatability is well taken. You mentioned wearing clean, appropriate Western dress for starters. Can you provide some specific criteria or guideposts to help us begin to sort out the theistic and philosophical essentials from the peripheral details?
Good question.
Without letting the human propensity to take shortcuts waylay our spiritual growth.
Great question. Okay, here's in a nutshell, wherever that expression came from. If you look at chapter 6 of the Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami makes a distinction between fundamental principles that you cannot avoid, you have to follow them, and details which should be adjusted according to time and place. So if we take a fundamental principle, let's say if we take a detail to be fundamental, we're kind of messing up the spiritual science. In fact, you'll find twice in the Bhagavatam the expression Deshakala Vibhaga Vit, which means a knower. Desha, place, kala, time, vibhaga, distinctions or differences, vit, a knower. Actually, I won't go into all of it. There's very strong phonological evidence that the Sanskrit V was pronounced like a W, which is still done like in Swayam or something. And therefore the word vit is actually wit, which is English, wit, intelligence. And that's the verb to know. Also the source of words like vision, video, wissen in German, and so on. So, how did people dress back then? Like, is there such a thing? Is there such a thing as Vedic culture in the sense of a Vedic ethnicity? Now, I think perhaps the first and most interesting thing about the ubiquitous term Vedic culture is that it's not Vedic. I mean, Prabhupada used it, but it's not, there are English words we use in presenting Krishna consciousness that have direct Sanskrit equivalents. Like, for example, Ishwar really means the Lord, Deva really means God, and Prakriti really means nature. Like in English, like your nature as a person or the birds and bees. And that's exactly what Prakriti means. So there are many words where the English translation really is very close to the Sanskrit. But if you say Vedic culture, what's the Sanskrit word? I mean, we have the word Vedic. In fact, the pattern of forming an adjective from a noun with a K sound, you take the word Veda, you add a K sound, say Vedic with an I, is direct Sanskrit. Because in Sanskrit, you form an adjective by putting in an I and a K sound. So the word Vedic in Sanskrit is Vaidik, Vaidika. Anyway, so we have the word Vedic, but we don't have the word Vedic used with culture. And so my hermeneutic principle, hermeneutics means taking a rational approach to understanding a sacred text. You understand it intelligently, not fanatically or ignorantly. And so as a hermeneutic principle, if you have an expression in English that Prabhupada used all the time, perhaps other acharyas use this term, and there's not a direct Sanskrit equivalent in the scriptures, what do? The principle is that if you define that term with something that is in the scriptures, it's okay, because there's no problem with sort of inventing English terms which are translated in other modern languages if what the term means is something which is actually in the Shastra, in the scriptures. If you have a new term and you give to it a meaning which is not in the Shastra, you're in la la land, theologically. And so if you use the English term Vedic culture and you define that term as meaning ethnicity, sort of like Vedic architecture, Vedic cuisine, Vedic dress, Vedic musicology, nope. Because what you actually find is that there's no such thing in scriptures. There are descriptive statements, but not prescriptive. In other words, some statements in the Bhagavatam will describe different types of music or different musical instruments, and even the descriptions of what they cooked are very general, like a grain preparation, a milk preparation. It doesn't literally say sweet rice or halava, which is, of course, an Arabic word. So, therefore, if you say then if there is such a thing as Vedic culture, which there should be, because Prabhupada uses the term all the time, what is it? If it's not ethnicity, what is it? And there's a very simple answer. Vedic culture is Varnashram, which is everywhere in the Vedas. Vedic culture is Varnashram dedicated to Krishna. So in one simple sentence, that's Vedic culture. It's not dressing this way. It's not using those recipes. It's not playing these musical instruments. It's not building temples with this kind of architecture. It's just Varnashram devoted to Krishna. That's Vedic culture in Shastra. And Prabhupada said very clearly that with Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, ultimately Shastra is the final authority. So what Krishna teaches about material culture in the Bhagavad Gita, because he does say things about material culture, including food and other things and occupation, is that it should be in the mode of goodness, not passion and ignorance. So what is Vedic dress? It's dress which is in the mode of goodness, which means it's not provocative. It doesn't arouse sexual desire in other people. It doesn't, it's just decent and clean. It's not dirty, it's clean. It's appropriate for the occasion. Like some people ask me sometimes, like, well, that means I could, wear a bikini in the temple or cut off shorts or, really questions like that. And so no, because that's not in the mode of goodness. I mean, the fact that when you go to Deva Griha, which is a term used in the Vedas, means the house of God. The fact that when you go to a house of God, you show respect. You're clean, you bathe, you dress properly, clean clothes, appropriate, decent. That's culture. That's not ethnicity. And so if the Hare Krishna movement confuses ethnic details with cultural principles, if we take ethnic details to be cultural principles, then we get all confused. I actually looked up in the Bhagavatam everything the Bhagavatam has to say about wearing clothes, because I thought that's our most important source of reliable information, according to H.D.Goswami and Lord Chaitanya. And so it's very interesting what the Bhagavatam says about dress. For one thing, as a sannyasi, I explained this the other day. I have 3 options. One is deerskin, which is it's retro, but it may come back. And another one is tree bark, hopefully with Velcro. And the third option is what I call Vedic streaking. Don't wear anything. So, and these are, for sannyasis and also sometimes for brahmacharis. And if you read like what brahmacharis should wear, like straw belts and all kinds of stuff, it's very, to use an old expression, far out, all kinds of exotic. But what's interesting is that although the Bhagavatam talks about deerskin, Lord Chaitanya, who is the Vedas personified, forbade his followers to wear deerskin. So what's going on? What did Lord Chaitanya's followers wear? Sorry, there's a rerun. It's like your I Love Lucy moment. But anyway, one time I was in Vrindavan and I went to say goodbye to Prabhupada because I was leaving India. And Prabhupada would always just say things to me, not because I asked him something. They're just things he wanted to tell me, kind of confided in me. And so he said to me that, he said, do you know that song, Bande Rupa Sanatana, the song of the six Goswamis? And I said, yes, because I really love that song. Prabhupada said, he said, the six Goswamis were the ideal sannyasis. They're actually the first Vaishnav sannyasis. Lord Chaitanya had to take sannyas from an impersonal group because that was the only accredited sannyas available at the time. And so then Lord Chaitanya actually inaugurated or actually revived Vaishnav sannyas with the six Goswamis. And so in that song, which Prabhupada said, he said, because they are the ideal sannyasis, if you study that, you'll know what real sannyas is. And in that song, you find the line, Kopina Kantasrito. They dressed in kopines and rags. So you have Lord Chaitanya's followers not following the Bhagavatam. You have Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta not following the six Goswamis. Why? Because it's a detail. It's a detail. And Rupa Goswami teaches that details you adjust according to time and place. Here's an example. I'll give two examples from the Bhagavatam about Krishna himself. Because like some people think Krishna wore a dhoti. Actually, there's no scriptural evidence of that, despite the, massive amounts of Indian art. Actually, there's no scripture. We know that the gopis, for example, didn't wear saris because it's said in the Bhagavatam that they wore skirts and belts, and you don't wear a belt with a sari. Anyway, and they wore blouses. I mean, the Mahabharata says that Draupadi, for example, had upper cloth, which you can call a blouse or a shirt, and lower, like a skirt, and belts. So when Krishna did come, even if you knew how Krishna dressed, even if you knew that, and we don't because it's never really described. All we know about Krishna's dress is he was really into yellow. And so that was kind of like his color, Great combination, blue rain cloud skin, yellow dhoti. I mean, it's beautiful. And Balaram liked Balaram to wear white clothes. Actually, he's called Shvetambara, which means wearing white dress. And anyway, so as far as Krishna, it's said in the first canto, actually the first chapter of the Bhagavatam actually says that when Krishna came, Kritavan Kila Karmani Saharamena Keshava, when Keshava came along with Balaram, Atimartyani, but he performed superhuman activities, literally superhuman, Atimartya. But he did so, Kapita Manusha, disguising himself as a human being, pretending to be human being. So however Krishna dressed, and the word dhoti is not a Sanskrit word, it's not in any Sanskrit text. However Krishna dressed, he was pretending to be a human, which means he fit in. It's just like Kunti, the great Queen Kunti in her prayers says to Krishna that different people speculate, why you came to this world. And so it said that you came nato natya dharojata, that you came to this world. You know Sanskrit?
I've studied a bit.
Oh, good. Very good. So nata, like Lord Shiva's called Nataraj, because it means like an entertainer, an actor. It can mean an actor or a dancer. And then natya, from the word nata, means like a theatrical disguise or theatrical costume from the word nata. And dharo means wearing. So it said that Kunti Devi says that Krishna came nato natya dharo jata, just like an actor in costume. So however Krishna dressed, he was dressed that way because he was an actor in costume. In other words, he was pretending to be a human being. Why did Lord Chaitanya wear certain clothes? Because that was the fashion for sannyasis. He dressed that way because he brought, the eternal dress of the Chaitanya neighborhood of Krishna Loka? No, because everyone else was dressed like that. To give enough, so, what does that mean for us? Duh. So like, for example, when Krishna lived in Vrindavan, which was a cowherd community, a Vaishya community, although they're the greatest souls, he was raised by Yashoda and Nanda. And so every day of his life, several times a day, he ate food prepared by his mother, Yashoda. But when Krishna came as Lord Chaitanya, because he had to fit in and he had to be accepted as a Brahmana, because Krishna came as a Kshatriya, Chaitanya came as a Brahmin, therefore he would never eat in the homes of Vaishyas. He would only eat in the homes of Brahmins. Why? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Because he was fitting in. He was fitting in. Or, for example, Lord Chaitanya inaugurated the Sankirtan movement. And yet, although there are many descriptions of Lord Chaitanya leading his followers on Harinam Sankirtan, there's not a single word that would indicate that Lord Chaitanya or his followers wore uniforms. There's absolutely no indication they were dressed any differently than everybody else. And therefore, and they were playing musical instruments that everyone already knew about. It's not like they suddenly showed up in medieval Navadvip with the xylophone or the trombone or something. They actually, in other words, they were normal, respectable people, dressed normally, playing normal musical instruments, but refocusing everyone on Krishna. And so therefore, if we wanted to strictly follow Lord Chaitanya, we would be, I believe, and I think it's needed, we would dress normally, we would play normal musical instruments. I mean, not that you can't play mridanga, because we heard a very beautiful kirtan today. That was really beautiful. So it's so I'm saying, so Krishna West, this nefarious deviation which I'm trying to spread all over the world, one of the pillars of it is that if we're going to attract intelligent people, we have to be intelligent. We have to study. We have to know our own history. We have to know what our sacred texts are actually saying.
So it's
You do a couple more.
okay. I just wondered what you want me to do. There's 5 more questions. You want me to read them and you can.
I'll read one. I'll
decide?
give quick answers.
Okay, we'll do it quick.
And because I will limit the food deprivation. That is a proselytizing technique, right?
It
Food
is.
deprivation. People become weak and they'll do anything just to get food. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. In your work with Krishna West, what formats and approaches to introducing Krishna consciousness have proven effective so far? And what new approaches are you looking into? In brackets, in your talks, you mentioned referring to Krishna consciousness as bhakti yoga rather than using the term Hare Krishna, organizing talks and lectures in a comfortable environment.
Yes.
And sitting behind a
Okay,
book-
that's a lot. I better start answering some of this
just
stuff.
couples, and sitting behind a book table rather than accosting people.
Okay. First of all, as far as like not accosting people, but book table, the international minister of book distribution, who's my disciple Vijay, sits behind tables. So that's not. So what was the first point again? Oh, Krishna West. Yeah, I can't.
Yeah.
This is too much.
Okay. What techniques have proven effective?
Okay.
so far?
First of all, treating people with respect, actually being interested in other people, and not like trying to subject them to a monologue, but actually doing dialogue. And because how can you, like, if you're a doctor, how can you treat a patient if you don't know what the heck is wrong with them? Or like, we know, okay, you are. It's kind of like that old Hare Krishna thing of treating people as theological categories. You are a fallen soul. I am a devotee. You need to be a devotee and not a fallen soul. But people are not just, categories, fallen souls. Everyone has their own, everyone's individual, everyone's unique. And so you got to find out who people are, what are their fears, what are their hopes, what are their problems, what's easy for them, and then just kind of deal with them as individuals. I once got a letter from these devotees that were trying to teach Krishna consciousness in universities in South Africa, and they said, no one's listening. No one's interested. So I said, well, try dialogue instead of monologue. And they wrote back and said, yeah, no problem. It's all working. So that's one thing. Another thing is there's a certain percentage of every population that really identifies with weird and freaky. And it's not bad. It's not that people are bad because they choose to go out in public in a way which their culture identifies as weird and freaky. And of course, it's very subjective. For example, I think, was it Derrida or Foucault, one of those people, those French philosophers who deserve to be forgotten as soon as possible. But anyway, one of them did a study and found that that in societies, people who are mentally ill or crazy, they exhibit sort of crazy behavior according to the norms of their society, which is very interesting. So anyway, I think we have to remove as many barriers as possible so people can approach devotees without feeling it's weird. And this is something I thought before I even knew what ISKCON was. I'd met devotees in the street in Berkeley, and they did something very unusual and actually got me to give donations. And very unusual for Hare Krishna. And so I didn't really know much about them, although I thought they were really genuine and sincere. And so one time I was in LA with a cousin of mine, girl who was visiting California from back east. I was sort of showing her around LA, and we ran into a Harinam party. And it was kind of like, the Vedic Rockettes, they were all in a line and just dancing. And so I actually thought, there were great souls there. I mean, in the Harinam party, there was Tamal Krishna Brahmachari, and there was Vishnu Jana Brahmachari, and really great people. But they were all dancing like that. And so I actually thought, should I, because I've seen the devotees, should I go stand and chant with them, or should I stay here? And in my heart, Krishna told me, and I know it's Krishna, that stay here because you're a normal person. At least you look normal. And if people see someone like them chanting, that will be more persuasive to induce them to chant. So not only that, I want to really take a wrecking ball, a Vedic wrecking ball, to the idea that the more advanced you are, the more you wear Indian clothes, the more you're like immersed in this Indian culture. Was actually, oh, by the way, thanks for that wonderful kirtan you did. Because actually, in Prabhupada's teachings, and not only, in the Shastra, we have direct evidence that that's false. Because Vaishnavas are generally rated according to, Kanishta Adhikari. Adhikari means having a certain position. And so the word Kanishta in Sanskrit means lowest. Here's a little thing for you, that we get the superlative suffix in st from Sanskrit, like finest, loveliest. So we make the superlative degree of an adjective by adding st, and that's direct Sanskrit. An example is kanishta, which means lowest, or varista, the finest. But anyway, so the kanishta basically worships the deity. And there's even a verse in the Bhagavatam that says, Archayam Eva. Archayam Eva Haraye Pujang Jakshad Haye Hate. One who endeavors with faith to worship the Lord only in the deity form. In other words, I just go on Sunday, I see the deities, and you have some prasadam and go home. So one who endeavors to worship Krishna only in the deity form, Archayam Eva, Archa, it means in the Archa form, Archayam Eva Haraye, Pujang Yakshad, Natat Bhakteshu. But that person does not worship the Lord in the hearts of the devotees and in other people who are not devotees. So typically, as you know, puja, deity worship, for various historical reasons, is by far the most ritualistic, rule-centered of all devotional processes. And so therefore, when someone only is interested in Krishna consciousness in the most rule-centered manifestation and doesn't realize that the same deity I'm worshiping in the temple is in the heart of every living being. Every living body is a mandir. every living body is a temple. And so then the second class devotee does four things: worships the Lord, makes friendship with other devotees about at that person's level, is actually capable of friendship. Some people are actually incapable of deep, lasting friendship with anyone, which, anyway, I think there's some obvious psychological issues going on there. But so a devotee worships the Lord, makes real friendship, loving friendship with other devotees, is merciful to non-devotees, and avoids people who are really just demonic, that, you know, they can't say the word Krishna without offending it. Okay, so, but look, compare the third and second class. As you move from the third to the second class, there's a lot more interaction with the non-devotee society. So in other words, you're becoming less cloistered, less sequestered, and actually having much more contact with the outside world. And then as you go to the first class devotee, which is Madhyamadikari, just means the middle position, means a person. Madhyadikar would mean the middle position. Madhyadikari means the person in the middle position. And then you have the ultimate highest. You have the Uttamadikari, who, unlike the Madhyam, has actually gone to a more intense level of interaction with the world. Because the Uttamadikari sees everyone as a devotee. Some of them just have amnesia. You know, some of them are just, you know, suffering from some kind of, neurological disorder or something, and don't understand they're devotees, but they're all devotees. So in other words, it's the highest, the Uttamadikari, who is comfortable with everyone. And the second class devotee is comfortable with devotees and non-demonic non-devotees. And it's only the third class person who only sees Krishna in rituals and not in other people. So therefore, the more you're advancing in Krishna consciousness, the more you want to take down the barriers between us and non-devotees, not build them up. In that sense, I don't want to say I flatter myself, because that would sound very mundane. But in that sense, without flattering myself, I do believe that Krishna West is actually for those who really care about the world. Not only that, what we're finding is, because I give all these talks in which I say all these shocking, offensive things, Shastra-based, of course, and philosophically valid, but nonetheless terrible. So what we actually are attracting, the people we're attracting are people who want to have not only an emotional connection with Krishna or the Hare Krishna, but they actually want an intellectual connection. They have brains and they want to use them. And they want to have a reasonable connection with Krishna that they can actually present to other intelligent people and say that what I'm doing is not only enlightening, it's reasonable. And so that's Krishna West. It's not only to, redress people, get people to wear this, there's different kinds of clothes, because take down the barriers. Let people approach you. Show them you're normal. It's like, for example, let's say a friend of mine, let's say my brother, I have two brothers. And so, we maintain a really nice relationship. So let's say one of my brothers comes and says, I just saw this amazing movie. You've got to see it. So my older brother, he'll send me like these little videos of, different kinds of music. And so because I know him, and because I know he's a decent, intelligent person, and my brother, who was very successful materially, both my brothers, therefore, it's like, okay, he's a regular, decent, nice guy, but he's just trying to get me to read this book or watch this movie or listen to this music. So if you impress people, you're like a decent, intelligent, normal person. There's only one thing that you do that's different. You practice bhakti yoga. You're a normal, likable, intelligent person that's found this really cool yoga called bhakti yoga. That's the only adjustment. And what we're finding is that people are delighted to take a test drive in Bhakti Yoga. And so this program, which is obviously inspired by Prabhupada, I just took seriously some things that Prabhupada actually said. We're attracting intelligent people. Educated people. I mean, not that you have to have a college degree to join Krishna West. You just have to give me money. Just kidding. It's what I want. What?
Will you take Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Well, until it totally crashes, yes.
Installment payment.
So, actually, I have a nephew who's like Bitcoin. I mean, he's really into Bitcoins. He's got his law degree and he wants to go into Bitcoin. So, anyway, so that's Krishna West, and the reason you could say like, why even do all this if there's already Hare Krishna? Because when Prabhupada was here, when I took sannyas, I actually got kind of, how would you say, like sort of kicked up a notch in the sense that, before I took sannyas, I was grihasta, I was temple president, and if Prabhupada came somewhere, you'd kind of wait, maybe you'd go to see in his room one time. When I became a sannyasi, suddenly, I could go more to Prabhupada's room. Although one time I overplayed that, and and Prabhupada was talking to people, and I walked in, and Prabhupada said, "What are you doing here?" Like, why are you? And I said, "Oh, I was just leaving." So,
Good save.
but then Prabhupada called me to his room in. Okay, there's something I feel maybe I should say. And it's very embarrassing to say it because it makes me look good. And, Hare Krishna leaders are known anyway. But I'm going to that. But when I was just a bhakta, I'm not a bhakta, I just gotten first initiation. And Prabhupada heard about some of the things I was doing. I was teaching the devotees. And Prabhupada actually said, because it was relayed to me by my temple president to whom Prabhupada said it. And he said, "Who is this boy?" Because I was, just a young guy. And he said, "He has a transcendental brain." Prabhupada actually said that. And obviously it came from Prabhupada because before Prabhupada, I was a complete moron. I mean, I thought I was intellectual and everything, but I was, basically got everything wrong with all my, IQ and everything. And so Prabhupada, one time I got my mother to go and see Prabhupada. It was the only time I ever saw my mother where she didn't say, "Why don't you leave this movement?" She was actually very impressed with Prabhupada. And I took her up the stairs in LA to Prabhupada's quarters. And Prabhupada, the first thing he said immediately captured her heart. And Prabhupada said, "Your son is very intelligent." Because I don't know how, because whenever I was in Prabhupada's room, all I remember is just saying stupid things to Prabhupada. And then my mother, I was just sitting there like, what would happen if two worlds collided? Because there's my mother, there's my Jewish mother, and here's Prabhupada. It's like, oh my God, these are parallel universes. And so, and then my mother started telling Prabhupada about all the high test scores I got, when I went to school. I was thinking, Hare Krishna. So anyway, so Prabhupada would actually confide in me. I mean, a lot of times he would just tell me things because I never really asked him anything. I mean, and whenever I did ask, he'd always say like, "Why are you asking me a question? I'm already telling you everything." But so my relationship with Prabhupada wasn't really asking him questions, but many times he would just sort of tell me things. He would tell me things, and one thing he really emphasized to me was his vision that he really wanted to save the planet. He really wanted to save the planet. And, Prabhupada was a perfect, loving father. And he was getting letters every day because he sent his disciples all over the earth to open little centers. And inevitably, some of them, would write to Prabhupada and say, "Prabhupada, I'm discouraged. People aren't coming to the programs and everything." And so then Prabhupada would say things like, "If you're selling a diamond, you can't expect many customers." So he was really a loving spiritual father. And so he would, "Don't worry about it, kid. You're all right. Just do your best." But if Prabhupada saw someone was actually having a lot of success, he didn't talk like that. Like one time in New York, I went to see Prabhupada at our temple, and it was I think in Brooklyn then. And I just walked into the room, and Prabhupada immediately said to me, because he'd sent me to Latin America, and it was just booming, and we were opening centers all around Latin America. and we were printing books. And as soon as I walked in the room, Prabhupada said, "How many books have you printed? How many new devotees? How many new temples?" It was like, and then he was so loving because I was doing that. I mean, actually, he was doing it, but he said, I was getting the credit. He said, "I'll give you the credit." And so Prabhupada, he would just finish prasadam. So he said to his servant about me, "Give him Mahaprasadam." And so then I got it. And then he said, "Give him more." And then he had his servant give me this full set of silk. No, actually, I bought for Prabhupada in India a set of silk clothes as a gift. And so when I gave it to him, he had his servant give me a set of his clothes. And then he gave me this shawl, I guess you call it, this orange, like hand knitted shawl. And one time I went into Prabhupada, he was so pleased if someone would go out and preach, which we're not allowed to say anymore, but go out and share. And so one time, also in New York, I went into Prabhupada's room. I flew there from LA to see Prabhupada, and I walked into his room, and he was just finishing breakfast. He was like, when you have really good prasadam, you're in a good mood, jovial. And so Prabhupada just finished his breakfast. He's really, and he a lot of times he joked with me. I mean, he wasn't just all serious. He joked a lot, Prabhupada. One time I went in his room and I was really serious, and Prabhupada kind of mimicked my gravity. He said, "So, what is your message?" I was wanting to remind me to tell the story about the girl cleaning. That's a great story. But anyway, so I walked into Prabhupada's room, and he said to me, "Oh, H.D.Goswami," he said, "you were preaching and doing service. I just sit here and eat." I mean, he was joking. So, I mean, obvious joke. So anyway, I was young. I was like 23 years old. Like I always say, I'm very proud of the fact that I took sannyas, became a big leader 6 or 7 years before my brain was fully formed. That's kind of a joke at my expense. Anyway, so I was just 23 years old, and so Prabhupada had been so nice to me, and he gave me prasadam. So I thought, I'm going back for more mercy, because I began to inflate a little bit, and so I went back in the afternoon to Prabhupada's room, and I mean, Prabhupada immediately. I mean, if you had tiny trace amount of pride, it was Prabhupada saw it immediately. And so I walked in his room, and he very mercifully ignored me. And there was this young girl. She must have been like 18 years old. And in terms of ISKCON's hierarchy, the transcendental pecking order, she was just some young 18-year-old girl that joined the movement. I mean, she had no position, she had no status, but she had devotion. And she was cleaning Prabhupada's room with real devotion. And so I saw, and I never forgot this, Prabhupada completely ignored me and my sannyasi pride, and he only had eyes for this girl. And he actually said to her, and he spoke to her like a loving grandfather. So, I mean, he spoke to her with so much affection. He was saying, "So, what's your name? And how old are you?" And he was just, treating her with so much love and affection. And she was just this young girl who was cleaning his room. And I got appropriately ignored because my head had swelled. And so at that moment, she was just, I don't even know if she was initiated. She was some young girl, but she was more Krishna conscious than me at that moment, despite, whatever so-called position I had. Yeah. And the same with the gopis. For example, how are women treated in Vedic culture? Well, do you mean, Indo-Muslim culture? Or do you mean Vedic culture? Because like in the Bhagavatam, for example, first of all, Krishna was on earth about 125 years. And you can multiply that by 365 days. It's a lot. It's thousands and thousands of days. And I mean, I take it for granted. Krishna did several really amazing things every day. Krishna didn't have off days. And so therefore, there were actually thousands of pastimes. So if you look at the Bhagavatam, what you're getting is a highly, highly selective little group of pastimes, which means that this tiny percentage of Leela that actually made it into the Bhagavatam was selected with very high level of intentionality, because Shuka Goswami and Vyasa thought these are the stories. In other words, they really took probably less than 1% of the Leela. And so therefore, when you read these pastimes in the 10th canto, you can take it for granted that these are the lessons that had to be taught. And so again, you get a lesson where women in certain situations are more intelligent than men. For example, in the case what was called the Dvija Patni, the wives of the Brahmins. Krishna's cowherd boyfriends were out, playing, and the cowherd boys were really hungry, and they found out that not too far away there were these sort of ritualistic, caste-conscious Brahmins who had offered a sacrifice, and there was a lot of prasad left over. So Krishna said to his cowherd boys, "Go and ask them." So they went there, and the Brahmins were proud, "Get out of here," because these are Vaishyas. I mean, are you serious? Vaishyas are approaching us? Then basically said no. So they went back. Devotees in general become very morose when they're very hungry. So that's coming down the parampara. So then Krishna said to his boyfriends, "Go ask their wives who are more intelligent." So they asked the wives, and they were pure devotees, and they said, "God, yes, everything." But now here's the interesting part. In this pastime, which was selected for public reading, every possible male authority figure told them not to do it. Husbands, fathers-in-laws, older brothers, grown sons. Every category of male authority told them not to go. And they basically said, "Eat prasadam." They said no, and they went. And so what happened? Was there some kind of like Indo-Muslim reaction where the men wanted to beat the woman or something? No. The men then realized that we're fools and our wives are actually intelligent. I'll give you another example where a woman is more intelligent. Because again, this is real Vedic culture. Kunti and her husband Pandu. Pandu was cursed. He couldn't have sons, and that was a complete catastrophe for a king, because Kshatriyas often had a sort of reduced life expectancy. And therefore, if you really wanted to preserve your dynasty, you needed sons. And Pandu couldn't produce sons, which was really a big problem. So then Kunti revealed she had received a boon from Durvasa Muni that she could call devas who would give her a son. So Pandu is not jealous. He's very enthusiastic. So first of all, because what is the world going to think? So to make sure the world doesn't think this is wrong, call Dharma first. The god Dharma. Yeah, but because how could Dharma do on Dharma? So then they got Yudhisthira, and then Bhima from the wind, who's one of the most powerful, and then Indra, the head of the devas. He got in Arjuna, and then Madri, who was it was sort of natural psychology. She had to have sons also, and so Kunti generally said, "Okay, I'll give you the mantra, and you can call them." But then, of course, Madri double dipped. She got the twin Ashwins, and Kunti was thinking "Whoa, I didn't know you could, I didn't know you could do that. So I didn't know you could keep your finger on the key, and there was a repeat key here. So anyway, so at that point, Pandu had 5 sons, and then he was like, why stop now? He just these are the ultimate collectibles for kings. So he wanted more sons. And he told Kunti, "Call more devas," and she put her foot down. She said, "No." He said, basically, do you want me to sleep with every deva in heaven? And she said that what people think. And then now here's the really amazing thing. Pandu quotes a proverb in Sanskrit, which says literally, I'm just paraphrasing that, a woman has to obey her husband whether he's right or wrong, which some people think is Vedic culture. So what did Kunti say? Kunti said, in your dreams. So Kunti said, no, you're wrong. And then she gave him different arguments. And as I say, the man always gets the last word. Yes, dear. So but the point I'm trying to make with all these stories is these are real normal people. It's not this idea like this totally, the men just boss everything. It's not like that. These were real people. For example, did women just walk around with their heads covered? No, there's no evidence anywhere in Shastra that women ever covered their hair, unless maybe it was windy or something or raining. To give another example of what real women were in Vedic culture, there was Krishna visited the Pandavas in Indraprastha when they came out of exile and the kingdom was divided, and they got Indraprastha, which is now Delhi. And so what we find in the Mahabharata is that they had resort areas. There were vacation places where people, there were mountain resorts, there were river resorts. I mean, they had vacation resorts back then. And so because it gets very hot in North India, in the plains, they had this resort area on the Jamuna River. And when Krishna went to visit, because it was, it was getting hot, so they all took a vacation on the Jamuna River. And it's, all the royals went, and all kinds of people are with them. And what's very interesting is that among the many events they had, one was a wrestling tournament. What's very interesting about this is the wrestling tournament was for women.
Wow.
Yeah, it's specifically mentioned in the Mahabharata. The women, because they're Kshatriyas, the women had a wrestling tournament. I mean, not all the women. I'm sure not all the women wanted to wrestle, but they were Kshatriya women, and they had a wrestling tournament. Or, for example, when Arjuna and Subhadra were eloping and they had to fight their way out of Dwarka, it turned out that Subhadra happened to be expert at driving a war chariot. Or, for example, take the case of Sudama Brahman toward the end of the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, where they were basically starving because they were just by circumstance, they just somehow nothing was coming their way. And so Sudama Brahmana's wife said, your old school friend is Krishna. He's now by far the richest person on earth. He's in Dwarka. Go ask, I'm sure he'll be happy to see you and he'll give us something. And so Sudama said, no, I don't want to ask him. Result, he went.
Yes, dear.
Yeah, yes, dear. I mean, Sudama didn't want to go. His wife said to go, and he went. So what I'm trying to say is that these were real people. You can't keep a marriage together if the man just wants to boss his wife around. You can't, unless the woman has her own sort of, emotional problem and just wants, punish me, maybe tie me up in chains or something. So, but I would say among emotionally healthy people, actually Harvard did this massive study of what marriages work and what marriages don't work years ago. What they found is marriages work when the man and women each have their own areas in which they're in charge. And if the man wants to be in charge everywhere, it doesn't work. Marriages don't. You can't sustain a marriage that way. Or if some women are very bossy. So I think we have to understand what real Vedic culture. These were real people, basically doing what real people do. So last. Last point on Sri Gyan, knowledge about women. And that is, I actually did the research in the Vedas, all over the Bhagavatam, other Upanishads, and it turns out that in Vedic culture, men do not call women mother, with the exception being if it's actually your mother. They call, and there's one case in thousands and hundreds of thousands of verses. There's one case where a man calls his maternal aunt mother. Now, Lakshmi is considered to be the universal mother. She's the mother of the universe. So sometimes she's called mother. But among human beings, men do not call women mother. And this is really shocking and frightening, but women actually have names. And men actually called women by their names, which I know is, degrading and should, not be allowed. So, for example, another thing is that there are women gurus in the Vedas. For example, in the oldest Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka, just very briefly, there was a very old genre of Vedic literature called the Aranyakas, from the word Aranya, forest, like Brindaranya. And because basically you find in all civilizations that when you have people who are seriously practicing spiritual life, they sometimes want to get away from the cities where kind of like the priests are sort of hired by the rich people and all that. Could never happen in a Hare Krishna temple where, they would make special programs like Shivaratri just to satisfy their donors. Could never happen. But anyway, so therefore, for example, in Israel, there were kind of like ancient Jewish yogis that thought that Jerusalem was corrupt because you had these Sadducees, these, rich priests who were kind of playing ball with the Romans and everything. And so therefore, they wanted to go away to the wilderness to do their spiritual practice. And there's not a whole lot of wilderness in Israel. So they went to the only place where you could really get away, which was the Dead Sea. And they wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so similarly, for example, the earliest followers of Jesus, some of them were by nature kind of like yogis, and they wanted to meditate and get away. So where do you get away in the Mediterranean world? If in Egypt, if you go south, the land actually rises. It goes into these hills and mountains, which become the mouth of the Nile. And so they actually call it Upper Egypt, which means southern Egypt. So they would go to Upper Egypt in the mountains and meditate. And in India, if you wanted to get away from the sort of compromised priest for hire in the royal capitals, you had two choices: up into the mountains, the Himalayas, or into the deep forest, what they call Mahavana. The great forest means like the deep forest. And so sages who were in the deep forest, the Mahavana, they actually composed theological mystic literature, which are called the Aranyakas. And then gradually, these Aranyakas sort of transitioned into books that were more focused on just on philosophy, and they're called Upanishads.
Oh, okay.
And so you have this, the oldest Upanishad is sort of a translation. It's a transition literature. It's sort of like bridging these two genres. And therefore, Brihad, of course, means great. It's called the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. The great Aranyaka Upanishad. So it's like the bridge between these two genres. Anyway, in this oldest book of the Jnanakanda, there are two prominent women gurus, Maitreyi and Maitreyi and I can't believe I forgot. Anyway, it's late. And so, but what's interesting is that these women, Maitreyi and oh my God, I can't believe it. Another one. Sometimes you hear that brahmacharini is not like really Vedic. It is actually. Gargamuni, the great sage Garg, had a sister named Gargi, and she's described in Mahabharata as brahmacharini. Yeah, and so these women actually would have debates with the greatest sages. Sages who actually composed the Upanishads, and the women would debate them and sometimes win. There were women who became gurus to kings, not just like, whatever the men, the sort of the demographic leftovers of the men, but the women would actually sometimes be gurus to kings, to prominent kings. So one part of Krishna, and in Krishna West, at least half our leaders, not more, are women. Not because it's affirmative action, but just because they were the best people for the job. So actually, one of them is here, Panchali, who's one of our best leaders. So, make sure you get her autograph before you go. So go ahead.
Okay. I have observed that some of the best and brightest among our Western youth are seriously addressing environmental issues and choosing a vegan lifestyle. What are your thoughts on devotees adopting a vegan lifestyle individually and or collectively so as to make ourselves more relevant and or more attractive to this group?
I've been vegan for some time now. I mean, for one thing, I can't digest dairy products anymore, so I don't deserve much credit. But actually, I should say that I've wanted to be vegan for a long time, just so that vegans don't harass me, and also because I believe that it is, in a sense, morally a very good choice. And for several years, I kept trying to be vegan. I kept becoming anemic, and then my doctor, gave me this whole scientific explanation, which I can't remember, about how my body wasn't efficiently processing plant protein. But something happened. Krishna touched me with this magic wand, and so I'm vegan. But I don't like harass devotees that aren't vegan, and so I feel it's kind of people have to choose. But I think it's a very powerful choice, and I think if devotees really want to present Krishna consciousness to more educated people, I think it's so I'm vegan. I mean, I always wanted to be a vegan on moral grounds. I just couldn't do it, but now I can do it, so I am. But again, I don't want to use that old noun become verb. I don't want to guilt trip other people. It's amazing in English how they make verbs out of nouns and nouns out of verbs.
Yeah.
So yes, next one.
Oh, I thought you said that was the last one.
Oh,
No?
well, we're probably a couple more.
The prasad's almost ready.
Okay, we'll just finish up real quick.
Okay. Our nation and world are in a state of crisis,
It's almost ready.
and I want to do all I can to help. Prabhupada said that spreading Krishna consciousness is the highest form of welfare work, but honestly, I'm not very good at that so far. So do you have any suggestions?
I do.
On how to balance my efforts to spread Krishna consciousness with efforts to support causes that directly address the environmental crisis, animal welfare issues, and other worthy causes?
Yeah, first of all, I would say if you can't directly preach spiritually, help those who are. I mean, we desperately need a powerful, articulate Vaishnava environmental project. And actually, there are temples all around the world that are becoming much more environmentally conscious, using plates and spoons and everything that are biodegradable. And so what I would say is work for the environment, but try to find some Krishna conscious project that in fact is doing the right things environmentally. And we need a project. Next, see how fast that was?
Yes.
That was fast.
In the work with Krishna West, what did I already read this one? I read that, okay. Having taken to Krishna consciousness in my 40s and never having lived in a temple, mine is certainly a case of trying to teach an old dog new tricks. More than 20 years later, I'm still struggling with Sanskrit. Is there something like a Sanskrit for dummies source or course I can access?
Well, the only Sanskrit you need is the Maha Mantra, really. I mean, Haribol. I mean, you don't need to know Sanskrit to become a pure devotee and go back to the spiritual world. There's no linguistic requirement at the gates of heaven. And if someone is inclined, just like, tell me your name again. Bhumi, yes. Just like Bhumi likes Sanskrit, I like Sanskrit. Honk if you like Sanskrit. So, I mean, some people are just inclined, other people not. So, but it's absolutely not a spiritual requirement. Absolutely not. Is that it?
In your talks, you frequently refer to a term, something, Sukriti.
Oh, Agyata Sukriti, unknown good deed.
Sukriti, which has not proven effective in promoting Krishna consciousness among Westerners. What is the term and what is the translation?
Gyata is from the word jnana. Gyata means known, something which is known. By the way, jnana, in the Greek, it becomes gnosis. As we get Gnostics, Gnostics. Anyway, so agyata means literally unknown. And Su means good. We still have Su in English, also from Sanskrit. It just went through the Greek and became EU, like euphonic, eugenic, et cetera, so that English prefix EU, which means good, is Sanskrit Su. And kriti, from the verb kur, to do, we still have in English in words like create. So it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's, yeah. So anyway, agyata sukriti literally means unknown good deed. Like someone's walking down the street munching on a hamburger, non-vegan hamburger. And, there's hanging out parties, a sound went in the person's ear. The next thing you know, a Vaikuntha airplane comes and takes the person away. So what the scriptures actually teach is that you have to earn it. Krishna says in chapter 17, verse 28, last verse, chapter 17, that if you don't really believe in what you're doing, it has very little effect in this life or the next. But what Krishna also says in chapter 6 is that if you have a background, if you've been cultivating Krishna consciousness past lives, he talks about that. He says, Purva come from your previous body, or Purva Dehi. Then it's like what you already knew is awakened, like the Jamila story. I always tell devotees, don't say Ajamil because it sounds like a Vedic breakfast cereal. It's actually a Jamila. But so you have to earn it, but Krishna is very merciful. Krishna says over and over and over and over again in the Gita, I'm equal to everyone. I don't favor anyone. So let's say someone's walking down the street where there's a Harinam party and the sound happens to go in their ear. And let's say someone else just went the other way. And both people are equally unqualified. They're both, just materialist. One person benefits, the other person doesn't. Then how is Krishna equal? If one person's turning left and one person right, one is totally random. There's no divine intervention. There's no plan. It's they just happen to make these random choices. Then how could it be true what Krishna constantly says in the Gita? I'm equal to everyone. I don't favor anyone. As you approach me, I precisely reciprocate with you. The Pandita Samadarshana, those who are actually wise, see everyone equally. Samohang sarvabhuti, I'm equal to all beings. Samak sarveshu bhuteshu. Unless you are equal to everyone, you can't achieve the highest bhakti. So it's a big point in the Gita. Krishna's justice, Krishna's fairness. That's what you heard from your parents. We love all our children equally. It's what you heard from your parents, and you hear it from the supreme parent in Bhagavad Gita. So how could it be the case? I explain very quickly the word causeless mercy. It doesn't mean that there's no reason, because that's what the word mercy means. What it means is, if you look at the Sanskrit haituki, it means that unmotivated. In other words, when a devotee gives you mercy, there's no material motivation. They're not trying to get something for you. And so therefore, it's justice. Krishna's fair to everyone, doesn't favor anyone, doesn't hate anyone. And so I think we have to stop just trying to manipulate people unconscious of what's happening to them and sort of manipulate them into their own salvation. I think instead we should follow the Gita and actually try to persuade people the way Krishna tried to persuade Arjuna, and try to make our presentation so attractive that people want to become devotees. So that's it. Thank you all very much. Oh, my books. Infomercial alert. I did this book called Gita Guide. What I did, which is actually people really love it, because I set myself a challenge that I want to prove that Prabhupada's interpretation of the Gita is correct, not by quoting Prabhupada or quoting other scriptures, but just by going very deeply into the Sanskrit words. So, for example, I take the word yoga, and I look at every place in the Gita that word occurs, and I see how Krishna defines the word yoga. How does Krishna define the word bhakti? How does Krishna define jnana? How does Krishna define yajna, sacrifice? What does Krishna say? And so this whole book is just proving our philosophy by simply giving the literal meaning of Sanskrit words, so that you can actually prove to anyone that our understanding of the Gita is actually based on the literal dictionary definitions of the words.
Etymology.
Exactly, etymology. And this cute little item here This is called Quest for Justice, which is I was invited to give these lectures at the that big yoga school on Paradise Island in the Bahamas. Vishnu Devananda's. Anyway, they get 1,000 people coming, so they kept inviting me to go there, and so I went there and I gave all these lectures on the Mahabharata, again showing how these are real people with real motives. They're just like us. They just lived a long time ago. And so this explains the Mahabharata in terms that any normal person could understand. So these two books, how much we charging?
Two.
Oh.
Picture.
$10?
15 or
It's gone up to
or
50.
2 in 20.
Well, it's just because of the, disruption of the supply chain. Yes? Anyway, if you want a book, whatever you've got, I don't care. And I'm never going to get rich doing this, and I really don't
I
need
care.
to. So if you'd like a book, just give a donation.
I do.
Thank you all very much. Now we'll see.
you.
Haribo.